They met in a sterile conference room at CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia on March 15, 1978. She was Nora Ashford, 26, linguistics graduate from University of Chicago with fluency in German and Czech. He was Grant Mercer, 29, MIT-trained electrical engineer who spoke Polish like a native. Both unmarried, both without family anchors, both selected for the agency's most classified experimental program. If you're loving the content, make sure to subscribe right now so you don't miss us in your recommendations. We upload new, exciting videos every day. Thank you for watching. Let's get into it. The spring rain tapped against the windows as they sat across from each other, uncertain why they'd been summoned together. Deputy Director Lawrence Hutchins placed 2 manila folders stamped "Eyes Only" before them and spoke with bureaucratic detachment. In 4 months, you will become husband and wife. 6 months from today, you'll relocate to Prague as American expatriates. Grant and Nora Mercer, a married couple seeking business opportunities in Czechoslovakia. Your mission duration? Indefinite. Minimum 5 years. Nora's stomach dropped. Grant's jaw tightened. They exchanged bewildered glances. "Sir," Nora began carefully, "we've never even been introduced." Hutchins adjusted his glasses with practiced patience. "Precisely the point, Ms. Ashford. You have 4 months to build a credible marriage history. Operation Covenant creates deep cover married teams for Iron Curtain penetration. Statistical analysis shows married couples integrate 73% faster, draw 45% less scrutiny, and maintain cover 89% longer than solo operatives." Grant leaned forward, his engineer's mind processing variables. "What if our compatibility assessment suggests this won't work?" Hutchins' expression hardened imperceptibly. "Mr. Mercer, you've completed 18 months of NOC training at considerable taxpayer expense. You possess classified knowledge of our methodologies, safe houses, and active operations. Declining this assignment would necessitate reassignment to signals analysis in the basement of Fort Meade, Maryland, under enhanced security monitoring. Permanently." He paused meaningfully. "The choice is yours, naturally." The threat hung in the air like cordite. Nora felt her carefully constructed career trajectory collapsing into a binary choice. After 2 minutes of suffocating silence, she spoke first. "I understand. I accept the assignment." Grant studied her profile, the determination in her posture despite the fear in her eyes, then turned to Hutchins. "When do we start?" Hutchins smiled without warmth. 0800 tomorrow. Safe Site Delta, Shenandoah Valley. Transportation details in your packets. Congratulations on your engagement. They met in the parking garage, each carrying a single duffel bag. The March wind cut through the concrete structure as they stood by the agency's sedan, strangers about to become intimates by executive order. Grant extended his hand formally. "Grant Mercer, I guess we should talk before tomorrow." Nora shook it, noting the calluses that suggested hands-on work beyond academia. "Nora Ashford, there's a diner off Route 7. We should probably know basic facts about each other." The diner was classic Americana, red vinyl booths, bottomless coffee, pie rotating in a glass case. They chose a corner booth, ordered coffee they didn't drink, and began the strangest first date either had experienced. "I'll go first," Nora offered. Born in Evanston, Illinois, only child. Father was a literature professor at Northwestern, died of a heart attack when I was 14. Mother remarried a man I couldn't stand, moved to Arizona my junior year of high school. I stayed with my aunt, finished school, got a scholarship to U of C. Mother died in a car accident 2 years ago. No siblings, no close family, no one wondering where I am. She said it matter-of-factly, but Grant heard the loneliness beneath. "My turn," Grant said quietly. Boston suburbs. Father was an architect, mother taught piano. Both killed by a drunk driver when I was 19, They were driving back from Cape Cod. I was supposed to be in the car, but stayed an extra day with friends. His voice remained steady, but his knuckles whitened around the coffee cup. Only child. No aunts or uncles. Finished MIT on survivor benefits and student loans. Been alone since. They sat in the understanding silence of two people who'd learned too young that life offers no guarantees. They chose us because we're ghosts, Nora said finally. No one to miss us, no one to ask questions, no one to come looking. Grant nodded slowly. Perfect candidates for erasure. We barely exist on paper as it is. So what are we supposed to do now? Nora asked. Pretend we're in love when we just met? I think, Grant said carefully, we just try to be honest with each other. That's the only real thing we can control in this whole mess. Nora met his eyes, gray, intelligent, carrying the same resignation she felt. Okay. Honesty. That's our rule. They talked for 3 hours, swapping college stories and awkward truths, learning each other's tells and quirks. When they finally left, they weren't in love, weren't even friends, really, but they'd established something more valuable, a fragile alliance against the machinery that had conscripted their lives. Safe Site Delta turned out to be a converted estate in the Shenandoah foothills, gracious southern architecture hiding its true purpose. They arrived separately to find Deputy Director Hutchins waiting with a team. Dr. Ellen Raines, psychologist. Marcus Webb, cover documentation specialist. Professor Dietrich Klein, language and culture, and 3 other handlers whose specialties remained unspecified. Welcome to your marriage, Hutchins announced. For the next 16 weeks, you'll live as husband and wife in the guest house. You'll eat together, sleep together, argue together, make up together. By July, you won't remember where the performance ends and reality begins. That's the point. The guest house was deliberately intimate. 1 bedroom, galley kitchen, small living area. Everything staged to force proximity. Nora's stomach knotted as she saw the single queen bed. Ground rules, she said once they were alone. I take the bed, you take the couch until we figure this out. Grant nodded immediately. Agreed. We move at your pace. No pressure. That first week was excruciating. They were strangers performing intimacy for an invisible audience. They'd found 3 surveillance cameras immediately, assumed more they couldn't spot. Every conversation felt rehearsed. Every touch was calculated. They addressed each other formally, moved around each other like orbiting satellites. Dr. Raines ran daily sessions designed to accelerate bonding. Tell each other your most embarrassing moments, your greatest fears, the dreams you abandoned. She pushed them to excavate vulnerabilities, believing shared secrets create intimacy. This is artificial, Nora protested after one particularly invasive session. You can't manufacture genuine connection on a schedule. Can't you? Dr. Raines countered. Studies show proximity, shared experience, and reciprocal disclosure create attachment regardless of initial intent. The heart doesn't distinguish between genuine and engineered circumstances. But she was wrong about one thing. They weren't following her script. Late at night, after the sessions ended, Grant and Nora developed their own ritual. They'd sit on the small porch, speaking in low voices about things that mattered. Books they'd loved, places they wanted to see, the small rebellions that had defined them. These conversations weren't for the cameras or the agency. They were for survival. 2 people refusing to let the institution erase them entirely. I wanted to be a translator at the UN, Nora confessed one night in late March. Help people understand each other across languages. Naive, right? Not naive, Grant said. I wanted to design sustainable energy systems, clean tech before it was trendy. We both wanted to build things, not tear them down. And now we're spies. Now we're spies. The first genuine breakthrough came in week 5. They were practicing their cover story, how they'd met, their courtship, their engagement, when Grant suddenly stopped mid-sentence. This is absurd. We're memorizing a romance that never happened. That's the assignment, Nora said wearily. No, Grant stood, pacing. If we're going to sell this to trained intelligence officers in Prague, it can't be a script. It has to feel real, because something real is underneath it. Nora looked up. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we stop pretending we're actors learning lines and start actually getting to know each other. Let the real relationship, whatever it becomes, inform the cover story, instead of the other way around. It was a subtle shift, but everything changed. Instead of rehearsing fictional first dates, they created real moments, cooking disasters in the tiny kitchen, morning coffee and comfortable silence, discovering shared tastes in music. They started sleeping in the same bed, not because the agency demanded it, but because the couch hurt Grant's back, and Nora found the arrangement less lonely than she'd expected. The first time Grant kissed her wasn't for practice. It was in week 7, after she'd received devastating news that her childhood home in Evanston was being demolished. She'd cried for the first time since training began, and he'd held her without saying stupid, comforting lies, and when she'd looked up at him, the kiss happened naturally. Was that part of the training? She'd asked afterward, half joking, half afraid of the answer. No, Grant said quietly. That was just me, wanting to kiss you. By week 10, they weren't pretending anymore. The intimacy had become real. They'd memorized each other's coffee preferences, sleep patterns, the way Nora rubbed her left temple when stressed, the way Grant hummed unconsciously while working on technical problems. They'd become what the agency wanted, a convincing, married couple. But they'd also become something unplanned, genuinely attached. Dr. Raines noticed during a session in week 12. You've stopped performing for me, she observed. Is that a problem? Grant asked. On the contrary, it's ideal. You've internalized the dynamic. Your attachment reads as authentic because it is. She made a note. However, I must caution you. Emotional involvement complicates operational clarity. Don't let feelings compromise judgment. After she left, Nora turned to Grant. Are we making a mistake, getting genuinely involved? Grant considered carefully. I think the mistake was thinking we could avoid it. 4 months of enforced intimacy with someone you actually like? This was inevitable. Do you? Like me, I mean? He smiled, a rare, genuine expression. Nora, I'm falling in love with you. I've been trying not to because this whole thing is insane, but I can't help it. Nora felt her carefully maintained emotional distance crumbling. The agency won't care. We're tools to them. Then we'll be tools who love each other. Maybe that's our small rebellion. The final month of training focused on operational tradecraft, surveillance detection, brush passes, encrypted communication, handling a network of assets. They excelled because they worked as an intuitive unit, each covering the other's blind spots. The wedding ceremony was perfunctory. A justice of the peace in Alexandria, 2 agency witnesses, legal documents binding them for the mission. But that night, alone in the safe house, they exchanged private vows. I promise, Grant said, that no matter what the agency demands, I'll always see you as Nora, not just an operative. You're real to me. I promise, Nora replied, that if this goes wrong, we go down together. No one left behind. They sealed it with a kiss that had nothing to do with cover stories. July 1978. Prague greeted them with Gothic architecture and oppressive heat. They'd flown through Vienna, carrying American passports and carefully constructed legends. Grant Mercer, telecommunications consultant seeking Eastern European market opportunities. Nora Mercer, his wife, a freelance translator. Their apartment was in Vinoradi, a respectable neighborhood, 2 rooms in a pre-war building with high ceilings and cranky radiators. The STB, Czechoslovak State Security, would be watching. The KGB maintained officers in Prague. They were swimming in enemy waters. The first week they focused purely on establishing patterns, Grant meeting potential business contacts, CIA assets under commercial cover, Nora taking translation jobs, both becoming familiar faces in local shops and cafes. They behaved exactly like ambitious Americans capitalizing on détente-era opportunities. Their first brush with danger came in week 3. A man approached Nora in Wenceslas Square, middle-aged, spoke English with Russian accent. Mrs. Mercer, I wonder if you might help with translation services for my company. Everything about him screamed intelligence officer. Nora followed protocol, polite interest, exchanged business cards, promised to follow up. She memorized his face and the Cyrillic script on his card for the contact report she'd encode later. That night, transmitting on their concealed radio, she reported to Langley. The response came via number station broadcast decoded through their one-time pad. Asset identified as KGB Major Volkov, Prague residency. Maintain distance. Do not engage further. They're probing us already, Nora said after destroying the decryption materials, testing whether we're just who we claim to be. Grant nodded grimly. We play it straight. Boring American business couple. Nothing to see here. But the tension of constant performance wore on them. In public, they were the Mercers, cheerful, slightly naive Americans. In the apartment, knowing it was bugged, they maintained a layer of performance. Only in coded notes burned after reading could they be fully honest with each other. 6 months in, their first major operational success. Grant's telecommunications consulting gave him access to a facility where he photographed circuit boards of Soviet military communications equipment. The intel was gold, extracted on microfilm hidden in a hollowed-out coin, passed to their handler during a dead drop in Letna Park. But success brought scrutiny. They noticed the surveillance teams rotating outside their building more frequently. Their phone had telltale clicks. An apartment search while they were out, detected through hair strands strategically placed, revealed STB was actively investigating them. We need to cool down operations, Nora insisted after they'd swept the apartment for new listening devices. Too hot right now. Grant agreed, and they entered a months-long period of deliberately boring behavior. Work, home, occasional dinner with other expats, weekend trips to the countryside. Model citizens with nothing to hide. The scrutiny gradually relaxed, but isolation in a hostile city, living double lives with no one to trust except each other, created intense pressure. Small disagreements became magnified. The stress of maintaining cover 24/7 meant they couldn't fully relax even in private moments. Their first real fight came in month 9, after Grant took an operational risk Nora thought reckless, meeting an asset in a location with inadequate surveillance detection. You could have been arrested, she hissed in English. Czech when bugged, English in the bathroom with water running for white noise, their only secure communication. The intelligence was time-sensitive. Your security is more important than any single piece of intelligence. Since when do you make those calls? Since I'm your wife and partner, not just your operational backup. They stood in the tiny bathroom, anger and fear and something deeper roiling between them. Then Grant's expression cracked. You're right. I'm sorry. I was thinking like a solo operative, not like someone who has something to lose. Nora's anger deflated. We're all we have here, Grant. If they take you, I'm alone in this nightmare. He pulled her close. Then I promise to be more careful. Because I need you, too. The fights became part of their rhythm, pressure valves releasing tension, followed by fierce making up that reminded them why they were doing this. They weren't just surviving an assignment, they were building something real in impossible circumstances. 1980, 2 years in Prague. They'd settled into their roles so completely that sometimes Nora woke up and briefly forgot her real name. They'd built a life here, friends, carefully vetted, routines, even a cat named Kafka, Grant's ironic choice. The cover was so deep it felt real. That's when everything shattered. Grant came home from a business meeting pale and shaking. He checked the apartment for new bugs, wrote on their pad, "Bathroom, now." With the water running, he whispered, "The asset network is compromised. Langley just transmitted emergency protocol. 3 of our contacts have been arrested. STB is rolling up the entire operation. We might be next." Nora felt ice flood her veins. "Do they know about us, specifically?" "Unknown, but our names were in one of the arrested assets contact lists. We have maybe 24 to 48 hours before they connect the dots." They had an exfiltration plan for exactly this scenario. Destroy all operational materials, pack a single bag with essentials, make their way to the West German border, cross at a prearranged point where CIA would have assets to facilitate passage. But as they began the meticulous process of destroying evidence, burning one-time pads, dissolving microfilm in acid, wiping surfaces, something stopped Nora. "What if we don't run?" Grant looked up from feeding documents into their improvised burn bag. "What? What if we disappear but not back to the agency? What if we just vanish, become someone else entirely?" Grant froze, understanding the magnitude of what she was suggesting. "That's desertion. They'd hunt us as traitors." "Would they? Or would they assume we were captured and killed? We could stage it to look like STB got us. The agency writes us off. STB thinks they missed us and we disappear into the gap." "Nora, that's insane." "Is it? We have false documentation skills. We have cash reserves. We know how intelligence services operate. We could get lost somewhere they wouldn't think to look." Grant sat back, mind racing through variables. "Why would you want that? We could just go home, debrief, get new assignments." "Where they'd separate us," Nora said quietly. "You heard Hutchins at that last check-in. Successful marriage covers may be redeployed separately to increase operational flexibility. They're already talking about splitting us up from new missions." The truth landed hard. The agency had created their marriage for utility, and when utility demanded it, they'd dismantle it just as efficiently. "I don't want to lose you," Nora continued. "Not to reassignment, not to another operation, not to the agency deciding we've served our purpose. I want a real life, Grant. A life that belongs to us, not them." Grant looked at his wife, brilliant, brave, exhausted from 2 years of performance, and realized he wanted exactly the same thing. "If we do this, we can never go back. We'd be fugitives from the most powerful intelligence apparatus in the world." "I know." "They'd never stop looking." "I know." "We'd spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders." "Better than spending them apart, following orders, pretending to be whoever they decide we should be next." Grant pulled her close. "Okay, we do it together. Where do we run?" "South America," Nora said immediately. "They'll expect us to head west to Germany. We go south through Austria into Yugoslavia, then work our way to Greece. From there, ship to South America, Argentina or Chile. Big cities where we can disappear, no extradition treaties, far enough they won't waste resources searching." They spent the next 18 hours in feverish planning. They'd make it look like a botched exfiltration, leave evidence of attempting to reach Germany, abandon their car near the border, let the assumption be they'd been caught in the woods. Meanwhile, they'd actually head south with forged Austrian passports, Grant could manufacture adequate fakes using materials they'd stockpiled for operational use. August 12, 1980, they left their Prague apartment before dawn. Left lights on, radio playing, breakfast dishes out, signs of sudden departure. They took only what could fit in backpacks: cash, forged documents, a few photographs they couldn't bear to destroy. They caught a pre-dawn train to České Budějovice, transferred to a bus to the Austrian border, crossed at a small checkpoint where their Austrian passports, Mr. and Mrs. Eric and Helga Lindström, Swedish tourists, passed inspection. The border guard barely glanced up. In Vienna, they became different people again. Purchased Greek passports from a forger Nora knew from her translation work. CIA had inadvertently trained her in exactly these connections. Spent 2 weeks dyeing their hair, changing appearance, learning their new histories. September 1980, they boarded a freighter in Piraeus bound for Buenos Aires. Paid in cash for cramped cargo berths. 32 days at sea, the longest they'd been truly alone in 2 years. "Do you regret it?" Grant asked one night as they lay on the narrow bunk, feeling the ship's engines throb beneath them. "No," Nora said without hesitation. "Do you?" "No. I choose you over the agency every time." She turned to face him in the darkness. "What do we do when we get there? Who do we become?" "I don't know. But we figure it out together. That's what we do. Figure things out together." Argentina welcomed them with Southern Hemisphere spring warmth. They took a bus from Buenos Aires to Mendoza, deliberately choosing a provincial city over the capital, rented a small house under their Greek identities, paid a year's rent in advance with cash. Grant found work repairing electronics. His engineering background made him valuable in an economy hungry for technical skills. Nora gave English lessons to businessmen and their children. They lived simply, quietly, attracting no attention. But paranoia never fully left. Every stranger might be CIA, every police officer a threat. They'd wake at 3 a.m. to sounds in the alley, hearts pounding, reaching for each other in the dark. 1982, 2 years in Mendoza. They'd built something like normalcy, friends, routines, a life. Nora's Spanish had become flawless. Grant had opened a small repair shop. They'd integrated so thoroughly that locals had stopped seeing them as foreigners. That's when Nora discovered she was pregnant. She told Grant in their backyard as the sun set over the Andes, hands shaking as she held the positive test. "I know we didn't plan this. I know it complicates everything, but Grant, I want this baby." He pulled her close, and she felt him trembling too. "The child. Our child, not the agency's operation, just ours." "Are you scared?" she whispered. "Terrified, but also happier than I've been since we left Virginia." Their daughter was born April 3rd, 1983, healthy, perfect, with Nora's green eyes and Grant's determined chin. They named her Elena, carefully avoiding names that felt too American. Parenthood transformed them. The constant vigilance that had defined their fugitive life softened into something protective but less paranoid. They were building a family now, not just surviving. Elena gave them purpose beyond escape. But in 1985, when Elena was 2, their carefully constructed peace shattered again. Grant came home from the shop, white-faced. "There's an American asking questions around town. Mid-40s, crew cut, too fit, asking about Swedish expatriates named Lindström." They'd been found. That night, they made the hardest decision of their lives, split up temporarily. Grant would lead the hunter north into Brazil while Nora and Elena went south to Chile. They'd separate to protect Elena, reunite in 6 months at a predetermined location. The goodbye nearly destroyed them. Grant held Elena, memorizing her face. Held Nora, promising he'd come back. "I'll be in Valparaiso," Nora whispered. "November 15th. Plaza in front of the Naval Museum, noon. Every day for 2 weeks." If you don't come, I'll come. I promise. He kissed them both and disappeared into the August night. Nora fled south with Elena, using emergency cash and documentation, crossed into Chile through a mountain pass, eventually reached the coastal city of Valparaiso, found a small apartment, got work cleaning houses, waited. November 15th came. She stood in the plaza with Elena, scanning faces. Grant wasn't there. She returned every day for 2 weeks, then another week, then another month. Elena asked where Papa was, and Nora had no answer. By March 1986, she had to accept he wasn't coming. Either captured, killed, or detained somewhere he couldn't escape. She was alone, with a 2-year-old daughter in a foreign country with dwindling resources. She did what she had to, created a new identity, divorced Chilean woman, Elena's father dead, found stable work as a translator, enrolled Elena in preschool, built a life as a single mother, trying to give her daughter stability while grieving the loss of the man she loved. Years passed. Elena grew up speaking Spanish, attending Chilean schools, never knowing her parents' real story. Nora told her a sanitized version. American parents who'd moved for work, father died when Elena was small. Simple, believable, tragic enough to discourage questions. 1995, 12 years since Grant disappeared. Nora was 43, Elena was 12. They'd built a life in Chile, modest but stable. Elena was bright, curious, bilingual. Nora worked as a freelance translator, had friends, participated in parent-teacher conferences and school plays. From the outside, they appeared to be an ordinary single-parent household. Then a letter arrived, addressed to Helga Lindstrom, at a mail drop Nora still checked monthly out of stubborn hope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. I'm alive. Was arrested in Brazil in 1985, extradited to U.S., served 10 years for espionage charges. Released last month. Looking for you and Elena. If you receive this, please respond. I'm in Miami. G. A phone number, an email address, a plea. Nora's hands shook so badly she dropped the letter. 10 years. He'd been imprisoned for a decade while she'd believed him dead. The agency had gotten him after all. Elena found her crying in the kitchen. Mom, what's wrong? Nora looked at her daughter, nearly a teenager now, smart enough to handle some truth. Your father is alive. He's been in prison, but he's alive and looking for us. Elena's eyes went wide. The father you said died? I thought he had. I was wrong. It's complicated. Do you want to find him? Nora realized she'd never stopped wanting that. Yes, but it means explaining things I've never told you about who we really are. Over the next week, Nora told Elena a carefully edited version. American parents who'd worked for the government, left the country for complicated reasons, were separated when Elena was small. Enough truth to make sense of what came next, enough omission to protect her daughter from the full weight of their history. So we're not really Chilean? Elena asked, trying to process. You are. You were born here, grew up here. But I'm American, and your father is too. And if we contact him, it might mean changes. Maybe even going back to the United States. Elena considered this with the seriousness of a child who'd learned early that life was complex. Will we be safe? I don't know. But I know I want you to meet your father. And I want to see him again. Nora sent an email from an internet cafe using encryption protocols she'd almost forgotten. The response came within hours. I'm coming to Chile. Tell me where and when. I've waited 12 years for this. Grant. They met in Viña del Mar, a coastal town near Valparaiso, neutral territory. Nora brought Elena, figuring if this was some kind of agency trap, At least they'd face it together. Grant was waiting in a beachfront cafe, thinner than she remembered, hair graying, face lined with years she hadn't shared. When he saw them, he stood slowly, as if afraid sudden movement would make them vanish. "Nora," he said, voice cracking. "Grant." They stared at each other across 10 years of loss and survival, then crashed together in an embrace that felt like coming home after an impossible journey. Elena watched from a careful distance as her parents held each other and cried. Eventually, Grant pulled back and looked at his daughter, stranger and flesh both. "Elena, you've grown so much. I'm your father. I know that's strange to hear." Elena stepped forward with 12-year-old wariness. "Mom says you were in prison." "Yes, for leaving my job without permission and taking classified information. They gave me 10 years. "But you're out now?" "Served my time. On parole, but technically free." "Are they still looking for Mom and me?" Grant glanced at Nora. "Honestly, I don't know. I told them you were dead, that you'd been killed in an accident in Argentina in 1985. They seemed to believe it. But I can't guarantee they're not still watching me." "Then we can't go back to the U.S., Nora said flatly. "No, but I'm not asking you to. I came here to find you, to see if there's anything left of what we had." Nora reached for his hand. "Everything is left. I never stopped loving you, Grant. Not for one day in 12 years. Elena watched her parents with the particular insight of children who've grown up knowing love is complicated. "So what happens now?" That became the question they spent the next weeks answering. Grant had been released but was monitored. Returning to Chile constituted a parole violation, but he'd done it anyway. They couldn't return to the U.S. without risking Nora's arrest. Chile was stable but held too many memories of separation. In the end, they made a radical choice: start completely fresh. Grant had learned false documentation techniques from fellow inmates, prison being its own kind of university. Between his skills and Nora's language abilities, they created new identities, Canadian citizens this time, complete family unit, relocating to Spain. "Why Spain?" Elena asked as they planned. "Because," Nora explained, "it's far enough from the U.S. to be safe, developed enough to offer opportunities, and no one will look for fugitive American spies in Barcelona." In 1996, the Mercer family ceased to exist. In their place, the Chamberlain family, David, Rebecca, and Elena, Canadian expatriates starting a technology consulting business in Barcelona's growing tech sector. 2003. 7 years in Barcelona. They'd done it, built a real life. Grant and Nora ran a successful small business providing translation and technical services to international companies. Elena had graduated from university with a degree in computer science, was dating a local engineer, spoke Catalan fluently. One evening, Nora found Grant on their apartment terrace overlooking the Mediterranean, holding a newspaper. "What is it?" He pointed to a small article. "Former CIA Deputy Director Lawrence Hutchins died yesterday of heart failure." Hutchins served during the Cold War and was known for innovative operational programs. "Hutchins," Nora breathed. "The man who started all of this." "He's gone. Most of our handlers are probably dead or retired. The Soviet Union collapsed, the Cold War ended. The world moved on." Nora sat beside him. "Do you think we could go back? To the U.S., I mean?" Grant considered. "Maybe. The agency that wanted us probably doesn't exist in the same form anymore. Statutes of limitation might apply. We could probably negotiate some kind of immunity if we wanted." "Do you want that?" He took her hand. "I want to not live looking over my shoulder. I want Elena to visit America without fear. I want to stop pretending to be David Chamberlain and just be Grant Mercer again. But I also know the moment we resurface, we give up this life. We'd be debriefed, investigated, probably face some kind of legal consequence even with immunity. Is it worth it? They sat with the question as the sun set over Barcelona, painting the Mediterranean in oranges and golds. "Let's ask Elena," Nora finally said. "She's an adult. She deserves to participate in this decision." They told her everything that night, the full story they'd edited for years. Elena listened, occasionally interjecting with questions, processing the revelation that her entire childhood had been constructed around her parents' flight from American intelligence. "So you're wanted fugitives," she said when they finished. "Technically," Grant confirmed. "And you want to know if we should try to go home even though I've never been there and barely remember being anywhere but here in Chile?" "Yes." Elena looked at her parents, aged now, gray creeping into their hair, faces marked by decades of stress and survival. She saw what they'd sacrificed: careers, identities, country, years together, all to protect each other and her. "I think," she said slowly, "that you've been running long enough. If there's a way to make peace with your past, to live without fear, you should try. I'm established here. I can visit anywhere. But you two deserve to rest." That decision launched 2 years of careful negotiation. Grant made contact with a lawyer who specialized in intelligence cases. The lawyer reached out to CIA through channels, proposing a deal: full debriefing in exchange for immunity from prosecution, acknowledgement that Operation Covenant's marriage teams had been ethically problematic, and recognition of time served, Grant's 10 years in prison. The agency, under new leadership and eager to avoid Cold War-era scandals being litigated publicly, agreed. In 2005, Grant and Nora Mercer returned to the United States for the first time in 27 years. The debriefing took 6 months. They sat in bland conference rooms at Langley, recounting every operation, every contact, every decision that led to their flight. New generations of intelligence officers listened, took notes, occasionally shook their heads at how things used to be done. Operation Covenant was discontinued in 1983, one young officer told them. Psychological studies showed the marriage arrangement created unacceptable complications. You two weren't the only couple to flee. "How many others?" Nora asked. "Classified, but you weren't alone." They emerged from debriefing with conditional immunity, no prosecution for desertion or classified information removal, but permanent monitoring and restrictions on international travel. It wasn't freedom, but it was more than they'd had. They settled in Asheville, North Carolina, far from D.C., surrounded by mountains that reminded them of Mendoza and Barcelona. Grant consulted for tech companies. Nora taught linguistics at a local college. They'd reclaimed their real names, their history, their country. Elena visited twice a year, bringing her Spanish husband and eventually their children, grandchildren who spoke 3 languages and thought Abuela and Abuelo's life story was the most romantic thing they'd ever heard. 2018. 40 years since they'd met in that conference room at Langley. Grant was 69, Nora 66. They sat on the porch of their Asheville home, watching autumn color the mountains. "Do you regret any of it?" Nora asked, a question they'd asked each other throughout the years. Grant considered, as he always did. "I regret the time we lost. The years in prison, you alone with Elena, all that separation. But the choice to run? To choose us over the agency? Never. We lost so much and gained everything that mattered. Each other, Elena, a real life, even if we had to steal it." Nora leaned against him. "We were supposed to be a fake marriage for operational cover. Instead, we became the realest thing either of us ever had. They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd been strangers ordered to marry, who'd fallen genuinely in love in impossible circumstances, who'd sacrificed everything to protect that love, who'd survived decades of fugitive life to finally come home. The CIA had tried to manufacture a marriage for utility. Instead, they'd accidentally created something they couldn't control. Genuine human connection that refused to be subordinated to operational needs. Grant and Nora had been assigned to each other as tools of statecraft. They'd chosen to become something else entirely. Partners, lovers, family. People who belonged to each other, not to any agency or country. In the end, the operation had failed. The marriage had succeeded. And that, they both agreed, was the best possible outcome. When Grant died in 2023 at 74, Nora found a letter he'd written years earlier, sealed with instructions to open after his death. Nora, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I hope you're not too sad for too long. We had more years together than I thought possible that day in Langley when Hutchins told us we'd be married. I expected an operational partnership that would end when the mission did. Instead, I got a lifetime with the love of my life. The agency thought they were building a cover. They accidentally gave me you. Best intelligence failure in CIA history. When you're ready, scatter my ashes in 3 places. Some in the Shenandoah, where we first learned to love each other. Some in Mendoza, where Elena was born. And some in Barcelona, where we finally stopped running. I was Grant Mercer, Eric Lindstrom, David Chamberlain, and probably a few others I've forgotten. But the only identity that ever mattered was yours. Husband, partner, co-conspirator in the beautiful crime of choosing love over duty. Thank you for choosing me back every day for 45 years. All my love, in this life and whatever comes next. Grant. Nora did as he asked. Elena accompanied her to all 3 places. At each site they'd told stories, some for Elena's benefit, some for the wind, some just for themselves. In the Shenandoah, Nora whispered, "This is where we learned to be real with each other." In Mendoza, "This is where we learned to be a family." In Barcelona, "This is where we learned to rest." And in Asheville, at home, surrounded by grandchildren who carried pieces of their improbable love story into the future, Nora kept the last portion of Grant's ashes on the mantel. "This," she told Elena, "is where we learned to come home." She lived 4 more years, died peacefully in 2027 at 75. Her final words, according to Elena, who was holding her hand, were, "Tell him I'm coming. Tell Grant I'm coming." They buried her beside him in Asheville, under a simple stone. Grant and Nora Mercer, partners in all things, 1949 to 2023, 1952 to 2027. Elena arranged for a small addendum. They were ordered to marry. They chose to love. That made all the difference. And it had.